Good morning. It is Thursday, the 28th of November. It is Black Friday Eve. Remember your debit orders. December is coming. It is now. Remember your debit orders. You're going to want to join in December. You're going to need to join in December. Just keep calm and remember your debit orders. But Black Friday is coming. Also, there are lots of ways that you can go online now to see if the Black Friday special deal that they're offering you is really a deal, or if whatever store that you're considering buying from, whatever brand, has hiked their prices in the last 2 months just so they can give you a deal and discount back down to their normal last 2 month prices. So please just go look after yourselves, behave responsibly. Black Friday is not for persons under the age of 18. Please look after yourself. Remember your debit orders. Today on the show, I want to talk about our education system because there's been a lot of shouting and twirling about the Bela bill in the last handful of months, and I think that has distracted us from what a disastrous state our education system is truly in, and the size of the task that the current, or still new, Education Minister Siviwe Gwarube has to deal with after the disaster class of successive ANC basic education ministers, specifically Angie Motshekga, who somehow is now, with her 33% pass rate, the Minister of Defense. Thank God, once again, nobody is just attacking South Africa. But, there are some stats that I've been sitting on, some research that I've been sitting on recently, which really cuts through and makes me realize what an absolute crisis we have. I posted a TikTok yesterday about the fact that 81% of grade 4s, that means 81% of 10-year-old South Africans, cannot read for meaning in any language. They cannot pick up the printed word. They cannot comfortably and to a decent standard of literacy read for meaning. And that is just an absolute disaster class that shows again how bad our education system is, what a crisis we're in. I mean, another stat that we always need to remember, another fact of our education system that we need to remember, because it's the last week of matric for this year, and the results are going to come out in a month or so's time, and we're going to celebrate the matrics who have passed, and we're going to look at the pass rate. We're going to look at how many matrics who wrote matric passed matric. And what I think a lot of us will conveniently forget, or it won't even occur to us, is how many kids were lost along the way before even getting to matric. The data from last year was that of all of the matrics who matriculated last year, of all of the kids who started with them in grade 1, 450,000 learners who started grade 1 with last year's matrics did not make it to matric. And so, the pass rate being in the high 70s or the low 80s, as it usually is, of how many people who wrote matric really passed, barely actually tells the story of the nearly 500,000 kids who didn't even make it to matric, who our education system and our society failed. So I want to dig into that and talk about that today, and talk a little bit about Bela. Welcome to Dan Corder in the Morning, your weekday morning South African news worth knowing podcast. 5 mornings a week on podcast streamers like Spotify and Apple, and 1 morning a week also in video form here on YouTube. Before we dig deeper into the country's education crisis, I just want to put one great message from the WhatsApp line 0607613436 from one of our great recorders. Earlier this week, you would have heard on the Pure Audio podcast a message from KG saying, "Hi Dan, I hope you're well. Just shooting a shot in the dark here. Do you know of a show that gives what you give, news worth knowing, with a business theme? I really love how informative your shows are, and I really think it'd be helpful for work if I had a similar podcast from a business perspective." And then in the last 420 hours, one of our regular recorders called Aurora said, "Good morning. A South African business podcast that I listen to is the weekly Stand Up, ! Stand Up Business by the Daily Maverick. It's hosted by investment banker Mark Barnes and Business Maverick editor Tim Cohen. Their stance is more centrist than yours, but their conversation is accessible, humorous, and informative." Great recommendation, Aurora. Thank you so much for that. If you have listened to it, let me know on the WhatsApp line, because I haven't yet, and I'd love to know what the people are saying. And then Aurora says, "I also listen to the monthly The So What podcast," great name, hosted by journalist and former Carte Blanche host Ruda Lutman and her husband, political and trend analyst JP Lutman. It is more a political podcast, but they do also address business issues. It's a drier, more analytical podcast. I'm listening to The So What on Podbean. Check it out. Great recommendations, Aurora. Thank you so much. Okay, let's talk about our education crisis. I just gave you all of those kind of, blood-chilling facts. 81% of 10-year-olds can't read for meaning in any language. there are likely to be 250,000 grade R's struggling to find school placements for that crucial first year of learning in January next year. It is, and for the 2023 matric cohort, nearly 500,000 learners who started with that cohort in grade 1 all those years ago didn't even make it to matric. And that's going to be true of this 2024 class when we get the results in just a month or so's time. And these are really devastating numbers, but we need to dig deeper into them to spot the underlying truths, the underlying trends. Let's start with the 81% of grade 4s, that's 10-year-olds can't read for meaning in any language. So South Africa has been trying to improve our child literacy levels for a very long time. And it looked like slowly, incrementally, in small ways, it was getting a little bit better, a little bit better, a little bit better. Since like 2010, 2011, there have been these small improvements, but not big improvements. Like pre-pandemic, it was still like mid to high 70s versus the 81% it is now. And then the pandemic caused an extraordinary damage and disruption to a lot of young kids. I mean, people at all levels of the education system were suffering. There were first years at university, there were matrics, there were grade 11s, there were grade 8s and grade 7s, all of these crucial years where kids were not getting traditional learning for at least 6 months, if not up to or longer than a year. And, you know, parents are not trained, more often than not trained to be good teachers. And many of them did their best, but they're not good teachers. And it was an uproarious, difficult, challenging, emotionally traumatic time. Many parents were struggling with all of their own messes. We were locked inside. We were terrified. It was hard to try and provide kids even basic education through online means. And particularly when kids are very, very small, often there are just things that they need to be in person for, things that they learn better and more effectively with, ways to socialize with other kids that you do in a classroom, ways to engage with physical things like tactile things like toys that young kids really, really, really need that they maybe didn't have in their homes. And reading materials, so important, that generally you are more likely to find at school than at home. Not everybody, in fact, very few South Africans ultimately grow up in homes that are full of books, and even fewer grow up in homes that are full of books that can be read and are appropriate for small children. And we've spoken a lot on this show about how unbelievably vital, non-negotiably crucial, the formative years of childhood are, from 0 to about 6, 7, 8, 9, even 10. That's when it all really happens. When we were speaking about the disaster of malnutrition in South Africa and how many millions of South African children get stunted because they are malnourished, not fed enough or healthy enough food when very, very young because of socioeconomic circumstances and poverty, that it literally stunts people's physical growth, and it literally stunts their brains and their brain development, and it is extremely hard, if in many cases impossible, to undo that damage later in life, because that's when it's called the foundational phase, because that is when the foundations of your being and your personhood are created, right? And so if kids are not getting good enough education, and the pandemic exacerbated all of that because they're not even able to go to school at a very young age, it's so hard to recover from that. And the other unfortunate truth about this data, about 81% of 10-year-olds, grade 4s, cannot read for meaning in any language, is that largely English and Afrikaans home language learners are unaffected by that stat. And that's because they have access to broadly far better schools, far more well-equipped schools because of the legacy of apartheid, and then into New South Africa, the failings of the government in our education system. It just means that if you are going to an English home language or Afrikaans home language historically established school, you're not suffering what the rest of the country is suffering. There's massive and drastic inequality in language across South Africa's education system. And so, unsurprisingly, the consequence of the pandemic meant that the vast majority of school-going kids or school-age kids who suffered lack of literacy development are black children, people of color, people going to non-fee paying schools, and people learning and coming from home languages that are not English or Afrikaans. And so the pandemic exacerbated already existing dramatic inequality in our education system. That's terrible. Then you think about the fact that 500,000 kids, and again, same trend, 500,000 kids who were supposed to be matriculating in 2023 never even made it to matric. And those are just the kids who did go to school, because some kids don't even get enrolled in school. The children who are left behind. And that's partially due to socioeconomic factors happening outside of schools. It's happening because of drastic poverty. It's happening because of illness. It's happening because of needs in the family home. It's happening because kids suddenly have to drop out of school to try and earn any kind of money whatsoever in a dramatically depleted, unequal, and painful labor market with so much unemployment. But it's also because of failings within schools. Under-resourced schools, schools which don't have enough teachers, which don't have enough literal equipment to teach kids, such that kids aren't even getting a meaningful opportunity to learn. They're just not. If they're going to non-fee paying schools in poverty-stricken areas, particularly in rural areas where it's incredibly hard to retain teachers, to get them to live there, to get them to stay there and do well, particularly in rural schools and underdeveloped schools where the infrastructure is terrible. So forget like old overhead projectors or a smart board, or like there's not even Wi-Fi, there's not even signal for internet, there's not even computers, there's not even in many cases still shamefully working safe toilets versus pit toilets. Like why would you go to school? And one of the few reasons why young kids do go to school is school feeding schemes, because very, very often school feeding schemes are the best way to get kids any kind of nutrition that they're not even being able to get at home. And so they need to go for that. But in some cases, school feeding schemes fail. And then even if you get kids there, sure, they're eating, but they're not then getting educated effectively, which is terrible. Absolutely terrible. But it's not happening. All of these maladies, all of these crises are not broadly affecting English home language and Afrikaans home language fee-paying schools, which overwhelmingly service white kids and overwhelmingly reinforce inequalities in South Africa by guaranteeing a good quality education to already wealthier, better off kids, and then providing them obviously the opportunities to go to university through the good education that they've got, or to just at least have really, really competitive skills to go into a job market to try and find work. So the disadvantage of our failed education system, the disadvantages against black kids, kids of color, and kids going to non-fee paying schools, they reinforce all of the other disadvantages. They reinforce and exacerbate all of the other inequalities that face the rest of your life as a South African. If you drop out of school and you don't have a matric, immediately you are unable to competitively apply for so many jobs. And if you do have a matric, that's not even enough in most cases to try and get jobs, because there are so few jobs that employers get thousands of applications, and they can be picky, and they can pick the people who are best qualified, better qualified than you. Again, if you are not getting that foundation phase learning, you are unable to learn more effectively all the other stuff that you need to know later. You are stymied, stunted, and delayed from being able to learn everything else if you cannot read or write effectively. And it's such a disaster that this is what really boils my blood about the Bela Bill controversy. Let me try and unpack this carefully. So some people hearing everything that I've just said will say, then why are we wasting our time, money, and resources on the Bela Act? Why are we doing this when there are all of these other problems? To which I respond in a few ways. One, the Bela Act is just about making sure that school governing bodies do their mandate that they are currently not doing and have not done for the last over 30 years since the start of the new South Africa. So if the Bela Act is required, if we need it to exist to make school governing bodies uphold the Constitution, advance transformation, and do their jobs, then so be it. That's one. Two, the Bela Act doesn't consume so much money that it is taking away resources to a significant degree from other parts of the Department of Education. And even if it was, then that's an argument to increase the budget of the Department of Education to incorporate that, not an argument not to do the Bela Act. But three, after everything I've just described to you, the reason why the Bela Act needs to exist to enforce the giving of opportunities to school kids to go to good schools, it shows how much more important that is. Because for now, with a crippled and failed education system, if you can't get into a good school, and good schools largely teach in English or Afrikaans and are fee paying, then you are condemned to almost certainly, in the vast majority of instances, a way, way worse life. And the law in South Africa, the constitution in South Africa, the mandate to SGBs, school governing bodies in schools, is to create opportunities for access and learning for school kids around the area that school resides in. That is their literal non-negotiable job. And if schools, and frankly, most, if not all, wealthier schools, historically blessed schools, English and Afrikaans home language schools, schools that have serviced wealthier kids for such a long time, if they are not providing meaningful opportunities for historically and currently disadvantaged kids to go to those schools by continuing to prioritize other learners, then they are failing to fulfill their mandate and they are failing to uphold the Constitution. If those schools are not providing learning opportunities in other languages than English and Afrikaans, and again, one of the massive pieces of fake news around Bela was that languages are being replaced. Home language English schools will now be Xhosa schools, or home language Afrikaans schools will now be Zulu schools. That's just absolutely, frankly, nonsense. But if there are opportunities where a very good, capable school can become bilingual, can have programs to teach kids in other languages, there are many bilingual schools in South Africa already which teach in 2 modes of language education, and these schools are so blessed, then they should be doing that. For the sake of the kids, our literal kids, for the sake of their futures, for the sake of this country's future. And when I saw the vast majority of people who were protesting the Bela Act, do you know who they were? The vast majority were wealthy, or at least better off than the average, white, English and Afrikaans home language South Africans, whose little bubbles, their worlds, are not commonly affected by what's happening in the rest of the country. So I can't remember the vast majority of these people protesting the education crisis. I can't remember these flags and these khaki pants and these khaki shirts and these self-righteous musicians and these arrogant politicians protesting the crisis affecting poor black kids. Poor kids of color. And sure, some of these political parties have complained about Angie Motshekga, and they have complained and they have twirled a little bit about the education system, but not to this extent. Not to the extent of the vehemence and the outrage and the fury and the twirling that they were doing about this Bela Act. For them, this was the big problem. Bigger in terms of publicity stunt and bigger in terms of public performance acting of fury than any other of the real, meaningful, devastating, life-affecting education crises of our education system that I've just spoken about. Because their care doesn't extend beyond their daily lives. Their care doesn't genuinely, sincerely extend beyond what affects them. And that just makes me feel very sick. So now you've watched all of this and you're thinking, Dan, what can we do about this? Of course, I'm going to say, yes, democratic system, hold the education system to account. Yes, I'm going to say we need to find new policies. We need the government to do different things. But the thing about education is that there are so many phenomenal NGOs and working groups and community action forums. There are so many phenomenal people, members of civic society doing incredible things to try to help. And you should go and support all of them. There are people who do free tutoring through universities. Oh yes, that's another stat that we should know about, which is that tons and tons of rural schools and schools in disadvantaged areas ask their matrics to teach their younger pupils what they are learning, because those schools have so few teachers or so few teachers of sufficient quality and know-how that they have to hope that they get some star kids who actually do quite well in spite of their circumstances to get all the way to matric. And then when they're in matric, when they're trying to prepare for matric, they're also being asked to teach the younger pupils so that they have a chance. And we need to find ways to help these kids as civil society. Donate to those book drives. Offer yourself forward for tutoring, whether it's, as I said earlier, because there are many university programs at different universities of the country where wonderful, wonderful university students give back. Figure out how you can provide food to desperate kids, that how you can help schools with basic materials. If you've got an old computer that you never use anymore, you know what could really how that could really benefit people. Is you go and make sure that you give it to a school. Think about toys. Think about tactile objects that can help young kids learn. And think about books. Just think and obsess about books. If you are from a privileged family, I know you've got books lying around your house and you're not reading them. You haven't read them for a long time. You've got books that were meant for your kids, that you as kids used, but there are no more kids in the house. Those books can be life transformative for young kids in South Africa, not as lucky as you are. That's what we have to do. And I'd love for you to get on the WhatsApp line once more, 0607 13436. I want you to tell me who you are helping, or rather tell me what organizations you're contributing to. Tell me about what community action groups or wonderful people you know of who are doing phenomenal work to try to help. Because this is a crisis that is ruining the lives and the futures of young children every single day now. It's not a coming crisis or a crisis that only happens once a year and then it goes away and comes back. No, it's happening right now. Right now. And we need to do everything we can about it. Have a beautiful Thursday. But I know that it's hard, all the information that we've just taken in the conversation that we've had. But we need to talk about it because this is one of those crises where everyday people can help, and we should be doing so. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. See you tomorrow on Apple, Spotify, or the other podcast streamers.